Why do you think you feel like an entirely different person the moment you walk back into your childhood home? There's a specific reason for it, and understanding it changed how I started to look at identity work entirely. I recently spent around a week and a half in my hometown of Philadelphia and staying in the home that I grew up in and lived in until I was around 25. And not only my home, but the neighborhood, the family business. I would go to the warehouse that had become the entire backdrop of my upbringing. All opened the floodgates to so many different thoughts, feelings, patterns. And I want to use that experience and everything that I feel when I'm home, what gets activated when I'm there, to really break down something that most people don't address when it comes to personal development. Because you might hear people say that they're aware that environment matters or tell you to get out of your hometown, but not too often will you experience someone dig in and pick apart why that is so important. But the reason why I can talk about the idea of understanding environments and patterns with so much authority is because I feel it so acutely every time that I return home. Because there are versions of me that location, that environment demands of me. There's roles that it assigns. And with that are patterns that I've had to work incredibly hard to shift that still get activated the moment that I walk through the door. And even after living in Miami now for 3 years, I'm still not past this. There's residue from that environment that still holds on to me to this day in some of the patterns and ways that I operate. So I'm constantly working through it, but I understand it so well. And well enough now to tell you exactly what's happening and what to do with it if it's something that you've experienced in your life. So today I'm going to walk you through that mechanism, show you what it looks like in my specific situation, and give you a way to use the experience of going back to old environments as a diagnostic rather than a setback. And so for you to understand where I'm going here, what you need to know is that environments are actually identity cues because our brains are wired to process familiarity and hold on to it. Every place that you've spent significant time has behavioral patterns, that has emotional responses and role expectations stored alongside those memories. When you walk back into that environment, your nervous system starts to read the room and loads that old version of you. And it happens automatically, whether you like it or not. For me, walking back into my childhood home and the bedroom that I spent 25 years of my life in and seeing so much nostalgia, those are strong triggers. And when I say that older version of you gets uploaded when you experience those triggers, I don't mean it as a metaphor. Scientifically speaking, that's directly how memory and environment interacts at the neurological level. Remember this, familiar spaces trigger familiar states. So no matter how much work you've put in to improve in so many different areas, when you walk into an environment that you haven't seen in a while, there's a part of you that will get pulled back to the surface. And so the reason that you feel so much friction, the problem is that version that gets loaded could be years out of date. And so an example there for me, if you watch my most recent video, is that I have a ton of stuff in my old room. And I grew up in a very cluttered environment, both mentally, physically. And so when I walk into my room, I see a lot of clutter and I immediately feel this level of stress that I had lived with for so long. And now in Miami, I live a very minimal life in comparison. By no means is it minimal objectively, but it is in comparison to how I had been. So separate from my room and the bobbleheads or trading cards or action figures or clothes or anything else that's still accumulated there, when I'm home and I walk into my family business and I see the massive amounts of inventory and stuff that we've held on to that have been there longer than I've been alive, that all reinforces a part of me that I've worked so hard to grow past, but yet it still bubbles it right back up. And that level of conflict tends to hold on to me in ways that I can't always control. And when I step out and walk through all the properties that I managed alongside my other 4 jobs, and had thought about all the amounts of labor and frustration that I endured while managing those properties on top of the stress of knowing that I had to go and drive to my basketball training clients while running that business and still trying to carve out time to sit on my own and build my coaching business. All of that crossfire brings into my memory all the time that I spent extracting every little bit of value from every available thing rather than building one thing deliberately. And all of the specific roles that I played in doing all of those things all get reimposed. Me and my expectations as a son, as a brother, as a contributor to my family business, as a property manager, and all these other titles that I carried that are all legitimate and that they were all versions of me. None of them are versions of me that I'm currently building. And so you might be able to think of your own examples and what that feels like when you return home or to an environment that you hadn't been in a while, and think about the feelings that that brings up for you. But again, in my experience, those emotional patterns that surface, the obligation, the pull to want to help constantly, or the guilt of having left that environment to build something else when there was still a lot that could have gotten done there, that all floods back into the picture and leads me down this path of not only evaluating all of my choices and understanding why it was the right choice, but also looking at my current environment and wondering, how am I still allowing those old patterns, those old trains of thought, or whatever the case may be, to still influence the way that I operate now. That is part of the beauty of returning back to an old environment, is having that opportunity to look yourself in the mirror and understand what's changed, what hasn't. And in understanding what it really takes to hold that newer version of yourself in place inside of that environment, you really have to be deliberate about it. And it's not something that happens seamlessly or automatically. It takes that intentional reflection to understand, how can this new me exist in this old environment? And vice versa. How does that version of me from that old environment exist in my current self? What's a bug? What's a feature? Before I go into that diagnostic of what is a bug or feature, I'm curious to know if any of this is resonating for you right now. What's landing? Can you relate to going into an old environment and experiencing some of these things that I'm explaining? So if any of it is lining up for you, all I ask is that you hit that subscribe button, because doing this work at that identity level is the foundation of everything that I'm building out on this channel and why I created the Clarity Code. So take a second, click that button. Now, when it comes to really being able to evaluate what it looks like for you when you move into these environments, the first key is understanding the level of your regression. That strength of how quickly and strongly you regress into these old patterns and versions of yourself tells you something. The more disorienting it is to go back, and the more conflicted you feel, the more a lot of that identity work is still in progress. Because if you're fully settled in your new identity and operating at full force, then you won't get destabilized by just an environment alone. And that updated self will hold its place regardless of where it is. And that's a big takeaway to remember when it comes to moving to new environments as well. Because if you don't do enough of the work to shift your identity and be strong in who you are when you move to a new place, Miami, for example, then you have a really strong tendency to get pulled into the direction of whatever that environment demands. And that's not always a good thing, because what that means is you're now have the potential to move further and further away from who you truly are and away from alignment. And with all of that being said, I can say firsthand that I'm still not fully there yet. And I believe that I will never fully get to anywhere. I'm always going to be a work in progress when it comes to evolving and iterating my identity. And I know that every time I go and walk through that old warehouse and feel the pull of older patterns or older tendencies. And in my reflection and introspection, I'm at peace with that, because I know a big part of it has to do with my commitment to be able to want to help my family. And I think being honest about that is way more useful than pretending that I figured it out, because I'd rather be conscious of it and accept it and know how it can hurt me and help me, rather than try to avoid the fact that it exists. And what I do also know is that understanding the mechanism, knowing why the environment does what it does, gives you something to work with. You stop feeling like something's wrong with you, and you start being able to name what's actually happening. And naming it, the same as with emotions and feelings, is the first step to being able to really hold your own ground inside of that environment. Again, for me, I know I'm going back into that old environment, feeling a little bit of clutter, feeling like I'm holding on to too many things, feeling like all these things that are going on around me might not be perfectly aligned with the direction that I'm heading in. But being conscious of that allows me to take that step back and zoom out in moments of clarity to interpret everything that's going on and figuring out, well, what parts of these do I want to tighten my grasp on versus what parts of these things do I need to release a little bit more? And I'll say it once again, if you saw that recent video, you'll understand just the very amount of things that I'm talking about holding on to versus letting go of. But all jokes aside, I'm not just talking about things, tangible things. I'm talking about values. I'm talking about roles and visions that you have for you and your future. This is why the first layer of the work that I do with all of my clients is identity. It's not goals, it's not strategy, it's not systems, identity. Because the environment that you came from installed a version of you that is still running in the background of every decision that you make. Sometimes you'll be more aware of it than others, but especially in times of high stress and uncertainty, that background system becomes more and more powerful. And one of the core functions for being able to update that system is clarity. Getting clear means knowing which parts of that installed version of you is actually yours and which ones you're carrying more so out of habit or obligation, or maybe even guilt. Now, the beauty about upgrades is, when have they ever stopped updating this thing? It never ends. The work is never fully complete, but it gets more manageable. And coming home or returning to any environment no longer has to feel like you're always losing ground just by showing up there. And it can start feeling like a source of information to be able to direct those future updates. Every time that I go home and feel the stagnation in not knowing which direction to move, and looking at all my clothes or all my shit that I own and trying to figure out what I need to let go of and what I want to hold on to, it's not a metaphor, but it also is a metaphor for all the areas and ways that I operate in my current career, in my current professional and personal life. And having those experiences becomes a really valuable point of reflection for me to know how I do and don't want to operate moving forward. So maybe a lot of this resonates with your background and the environments from which you've come from, or maybe you're able to use it as an example and apply it to something else. But if you want to start working through the identity layer for your own situation, go to my Instagram @JesseH.Hoffman and comment the word clarity on any of my posts or DM it to me directly. That's where the conversation will start and where I can begin helping you move from chaos and clutter into more clarity and conviction. So I hope you enjoyed hearing a little bit about my experience when it comes to environment, identity, patterns, and I hope that you check out all my other content so you can get more value like this. I'll talk to you in the next one. Peace.